Today, I'm going to tell you a story so dangerous it nearly erased an entire town. Set deep in the unforgiving American West. A land where dust ruled the roads, gunfire settled arguments, and silence often meant someone was about to die. It was a place where fate crossed paths with blood, and truth carried a price no one wanted to pay. It all began with one wounded woman stepping off a bullet-riddled stagecoach and whispering a single word that would turn a respected lawman into a hunted devil. Before we kick off this adventure, don't forget to hit like on the video and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. The desert never showed mercy, and it never buried the truth. When the noon stagecoach out of Tucson finally lurched into Dry Creek 3 hours late, riddled with bullet scars, every soul along the boardwalk fell silent. Yet it wasn't the shattered oak panels that sent ice through Rourke Holden's spine. It was the woman who collapsed from the coach doorway before the wheels had fully stopped. She wore crimson silk, but the stain blooming across her ribs was darker, thicker, something far more final. She didn't cry out. She didn't beg. Her blood-slick fingers clamped around Rourke's wrist, startling strong, and she whispered a single word that struck him like a gunshot. Pinkerton. The Arizona sun hung low and merciless above Dry Creek, bleaching the planks pale and turning the dust into choking powder that coated every man's throat. It was the year 1889, a time when the territory pretended it had grown civilized, though anyone south of the Mogollon Rim knew better. Rourke Holden sat on the rail outside McAllister's General Store, carving at a block of mesquite that hadn't resembled anything useful in years. He spoke little, trusted fewer. A rancher who'd buried his future beside his wife 3 winters ago. His hat brim shadowed flint-colored eyes as he watched heat shimmer off the packed dirt of the main road. "Stage is late," muttered the store owner, leaning in the doorway, wiping his hands on a stained apron. "Reckon the Apache've been quiet too long." "Probably snapped an axle," Rourke replied, his voice low and rough, like gravel shifting downhill. "Those canyon rocks eat wheels for breakfast." But he felt it then, the wrongness. The hush pressing down on Dry Creek, no birds in the ironwoods, no breeze, the land itself holding its breath. Then the sound came. Hooves, wild and uneven. A dust plume rose on the horizon like a spreading bruise. Moments later, the stagecoach burst into view, swaying violently. The horses were white with foam, eyes rolling in blind terror. The driver, Huxley Grant, lashed the reins and screamed, panic cracking his voice. "Whoa! Hold up!" Rourke flung the wood aside and vaulted from the railing just as the coach skidded into town. It was a ruin. Oak splintered where heavy rounds had punched clean through. One shutter hung loose, snapping uselessly in the heat. The horses didn't stop. They collapsed, sides heaving like bellows. "Get the dock!" Huxley shouted, tumbling down from the box, one leg dragging. "They hit us in the canyon, 2 miles back." Rourke was already at the passenger door. He expected a politician, maybe a land buyer, some overdressed fool from back east. He seized the handle, hot enough to burn skin, and yanked it open. Red silk spilled outward. The woman fell like a broken doll, lace and fabric folding beneath her weight. Rourke caught her by instinct, the way a man catches a falling calf without thinking. She slammed against his chest, knocking the breath from his lungs. She was far too light, and she didn't smell of perfume. She smelled of copper and gunpowder. "Easy, ma'am," Rourke said, bracing her. She was unconscious, head lolling back. Raven black hair had torn loose from its pins, spilling across his arm. Her face was pale as chalk against the vivid red of her dress, far too fine for a ride through Arizona scrub. but it was the bodice that caught his eye. Just beneath her left ribs, the silk was ripped open, soaked in spreading darkness. "Is she dead?" Merrick Shaw asked, his face drained of color. "Not yet." Rourke adjusted his grip and lifted her properly. "Go get Dr. Caleb Wynn." "He's drunk at the saloon," someone shouted. "Then drag him," Rourke snapped. He carried her toward the boarding house across the street, his boots sounding far too loud in the stunned quiet. She groaned, a raw, broken sound against his chest. Her lashes fluttered open, revealing eyes of sharp violet, rare and unsettling. "You're safe," Rourke lied. "I've got you." Her hand shot up, hot, slick with blood, and fisted his vest. The strength in her grip came from panic and pure will. She pulled him closer, lips moving soundlessly at first. "Don't," she rasped, blood bubbling at the corner of her mouth. "Don't talk," Rourke ordered, kicking the boarding house door open. "Don't let them take the bag," she whispered. Rourke halted in the hallway. He glanced back toward the stagecoach. Luggage was being tossed down, but near her seat sat a plain brown leather satchel, easy to miss. "To the door," Rourke barked. "Grab that satchel, the brown one. Bring it to me. No one else touches it." He didn't know why he obeyed her. Maybe it was the terror in her eyes. Or maybe it was the simple truth that someone had turned the coach into a coffin trying to stop her. Rourke kicked open the nearest empty room and laid her gently on the quilt. The motion sent pain ripping through her body. She cried out sharply, back arching as her hand flew to the wound. "Let me look," Rourke Halden said, his voice lowering without thinking. He had patched bullet holes in cattle and men alike. On the frontier, you either learned to work with blood and bone, or you watched folks die. Rourke drew his Bowie knife from its sheath. "I'm going to cut the dress, ma'am. I don't have a choice." She didn't resist. Her stare stayed fixed on the ceiling, eyes glazed and distant. Rourke sliced through the costly silk from the waist upward, peeling the fabric aside. The injury beneath was savage, a jagged entry wound where a heavy round, likely a .45, had torn through flesh. The bullet had struck the corset stay, shattering it and driving steel fragments inward. "Is the doctor coming?" Rourke shouted over his shoulder. "He's on his way," someone answered from the hall. Her fingers found Rourke's wrist again. This time her focus cut clean through the haze. "He's a marshal," she whispered, breath bubbling weakly. "He isn't who he pretends to be." "Who?" Rourke asked, pressing a towel from the washstand hard against the wound to slow the bleeding. "Who shot you?" She swallowed painfully. "Brackmoreland." Rourke went still. The name settled in the room like a curse spoken aloud. Marshal Brackmoreland was territory legend, a lawman praised for wiping out what remained of the Cochise County gangs. Newspapers spoke his name beside men like Wyatt Earp. "Moreland shot you?" Rourke asked quietly. "He missed," she rasped, a bitter, blood-stained smile touching her lips. "He aimed for my heart." Her eyes rolled back. Her grip loosened, hand slipping from his wrist and striking the mattress with a dull thud. Dr. Caleb Wynn arrived smelling of cheap whiskey and old tobacco, but his hands were steady. That was always the contradiction of the man. He could barely walk a straight line into a saloon, yet with a blade in his hand, he worked like a watchmaker. The room felt suffocating. Rourke cracked the window, but only dry afternoon heat crawled inside. Rourke stood in the corner, arms crossed, watching. "It's deep," Dr. Wynn muttered, dropping blood-soaked gauze into a basin already clouded pink. "Missed the lung by less than an inch." He glanced at the torn garment. Whatever kind of corset she was wearing saved her. Deflected the round downward into muscle. "Can you pull it out?" Rourke asked. "I have to," Wynne replied. "Lead festers. But she's lost plenty already." The doctor reached into his bag and withdrew a long, thin, metal probe. "Hold her still, Rourke. If she wakes while I'm digging, she'll thrash." Rourke moved to the bedside, planting his hands firmly on her shoulders. Her skin was slick with sweat, fragile, like fine china thrown from a cliff. Dr. Wynne poured raw alcohol directly into the wound. Even unconscious, her body reacted violently, a sharp hiss tearing from her throat as her back bowed off the mattress. Rourke leaned his weight down, gently but firmly. "Easy," he murmured. Though she couldn't hear him, the procedure was fast and brutal. Metal scraped against bone, the sound tightening Rourke's jaw. He studied her face, the crease of pain even in sleep. Who was she? A woman in red silk claiming a famous marshal tried to kill her, arriving in Dry Creek with nothing but a satchel. "Got it," Dr. Wynne grunted. He withdrew the forceps. Clamped in the steel jaws lay a flattened slug of lead. It dropped into a metal tray with a sharp clink. "Ugly thing," Wynne said. ".44 caliber, lawman's round," Rourke muttered, staring at the bullet. It confirmed her story, at least the part that mattered. "Stitch her up," Rourke said. "I need to check something." He stepped into the hallway where Merrick Shaw stood guard, gripping the leather satchel like it might explode. "Anyone asking questions?" Rourke asked. "Everyone," Merrick replied nervously. "Huxley Grant says 3 riders chased the stage for 5 miles. Faces covered," Merrick continued, "but he swears the lead rider's horse was a big black roan with a white blaze." Rourke nodded once. "Moreland rides a black roan." Merrick swallowed. "Rourke, if Moreland's after her, we can't keep her here. That man is the law." "If he's shooting women," Rourke said flatly, "then he ain't the law anymore." He extended his hand. "Give me the bag." Rourke took the satchel and walked down the hall into an empty room. He set it on the table and loosened the buckles, guilt flickering briefly at the thought of crossing into a stranger's secrets. But if Brack Moreland was coming, Rourke Halden needed to know exactly what kind of war had just ridden into Dry Creek. If Brack Moreland was riding this way, then Rourke Halden needed to understand exactly what kind of storm he was about to face. Inside the satchel, he found no clothing, no jewelry, nothing personal at all, only a thick bundle of documents wrapped carefully in oilcloth to shield them from dust and grit. Rourke unfolded the papers one by one. They were land deeds, dozens of them. Ranch properties throughout the San Pedro Valley, mining claims near Bisbee, and water rights stretching along the Gila River. He thumbed through the stacks slowly. Each deed bore a different family name. Some he recognized, folk pushed off their land. Others had died in accidents, whispered about in saloons. Yet, at the bottom of every page, the transfer mark was identical. Arizona and Pacific Land Company. And beneath that, written in firm, confident ink, a witness signature. Brack Moreland. Cold crept up Rourke's spine. This wasn't a lone attempt at murder. This was organized theft. Moreland wasn't just hunting criminals. He was helping a corporation strip the territory bare, acre by stolen acre. Rourke dug deeper into the satchel. At the bottom lay a single photograph, an old tintype, scratched and faded with age. It showed a younger Moreland standing beside a man Rourke didn't recognize, a well-dressed figure with lifeless eyes. But it was the third person in the image that made Rourke stop breathing. A little girl, no more than 10. Dark hair, sharp, serious eyes. Her hand rested in Moreland's. Rourke glanced toward the sick room where the wounded woman lay. "Daughter," he whispered. He shoved the documents back into the satchel and cinched the straps tight. This had to be hidden. If Moreland's men were already nearby, they'd tear Dry Creek apart looking for it. Rourke returned to the bedroom. Dr. Caleb Wynne was rinsing his hands in a basin. Clean white linen wrapped the woman's ribs. "She's stable," the doctor said, drying his hands on a cloth. "But she needs rest. No moving her for at least a week." "We don't have a week," Rourke replied. Suddenly the woman gasped. Her eyes flew open, wide and terrified. She tried to rise, but pain crushed her back against the mattress. "The bag," she rasped. "I have it," Rourke said, stepping into her line of sight. "It's safe." Her focus sharpened as she studied his face, searching for deception. "Did you look inside?" "I did." Her eyes closed briefly as resignation washed over her. "Then you know." "I know Moreland's stealing land," Rourke said. "I know he wants you dead. What I don't know is who you are to him." Tears leaked from the corners of her eyes as she stared at the ceiling. "My name is Elira Vance," she whispered. "Elira Vance." She swallowed painfully. "And Moreland, he's my stepfather." Rourke stared at her as the truth tightened around him like wire. A U.S. marshal shooting his own stepdaughter over land deeds. "Why bring this here?" Rourke demanded. "Why Dry Creek?" She turned her head slowly, wincing. "Because of one name in the ledger," she said softly. "The largest deed. The one they haven't been able to steal because the owner refuses to sell, no matter how hard they threaten him." Rourke felt the ground tilt beneath his boots. "Which deed?" Elira met his gaze without blinking. "Broken Rock Ranch." The room seemed to shrink. Broken Rock was his land, the ground he and Leora Holden had built with their own hands, the soil where he had buried her. "Moreland isn't just coming for me," Elira said, her voice trembling. "He's coming for you." Outside, afternoon shadows stretched across the boarding house floor, darkening the bloodstain on Rourke's shirt to a rusty black. Dry Creek was already beginning to stir. Whispers slid through thin walls. A woman in red. A shot-up stagecoach. Rourke Holden involved. Too much gossip for a restless town not to feed on. "We can't stay here," Rourke said quietly. He turned toward Merrick Shaw, who stood wringing his hands near the door. "If Moreland's riders are on the trail, they'll reach town by sundown. They'll burn this place to get her." "You can't move her," Dr. Wynne protested, pushing his spectacles up with shaking fingers. "Those stitches are fresh. It's 10 miles of washboard road to your ranch. She'll bleed out before you even cross the creek." Elira forced herself up onto her elbows. Her face was gray with pain, but her jaw was set hard as stone. "I'll bleed out if I stay here, doctor," she said hoarsely. "Rourke is right. If my stepfather finds me lying in this bed, he'll press a pillow over my face," Elira Vance whispered. "Then he'll tell the sheriff I died from my wounds." Rourke Holden studied her. There was fire in her, raw and unbreakable, a kind of stubborn will he hadn't seen in a woman since Leora Holden was laid in the ground. He gave a single nod. "Merrick," he said firmly, "bring the buckboard around back. Pack the bed with straw, thick as you can." He turned toward Dr. Caleb Wynne. "We need to soften the ride. Give her laudanum, enough to keep her under, not enough to stop her breathing." "This is madness," the doctor muttered. "Still, His hands moved for his satchel. What followed felt like a quiet crime. While the Dry Creek settlers clustered near the saloon, whispering about the shattered stagecoach, Rourke slipped out the rear door, carrying Elira in his arms. She was frighteningly light, far too light for a grown woman. She smelled faintly of lavender, the soap Wynne had used to wash the blood away. He laid her carefully in the wagon bed, nestling her into the straw and pulling a heavy wool blanket over her. "I'll ride ahead," Rourke told Merrick. "You drive slow. If anyone stops you, say you're hauling supplies to the mining camp. I'll be watching from the ridge." The ride to Broken Rock was long and punishing beneath the vast Arizona night. The moon hung thin as bleached bone, offering little guidance. Rourke rode his gelding nearly 100 yards ahead, his Winchester 73 resting across the saddle horn. Every snapped twig, every owl's cry tightened his finger on the trigger. He knew this country. He knew how moonlight turned saguaros into pale sentinels. He knew Broken Rock was the only place left in the territory he could truly defend. A box canyon ranch pressed tight against sheer stone walls. They reached it well past midnight. The ranch house stood dark against the cliffs. Before the wagon could fully stop, a figure stepped onto the porch with a shotgun leveled. "Easy, Doran," Rourke called softly. "It's me." Doran Fitch, old cavalry sergeant and hardened survivor, lowered the weapon and spat tobacco juice into the dust. "Didn't know you were bringing company," he said. "Open the guest room. Start a fire," Rourke replied. "We've got a wounded woman." They carried Elira inside. The journey had reopened the injury. Fresh blood stained the bandages as they eased her onto the bed. She groaned softly, eyelids fluttering. The laudanum had narrowed her pupils to dark pinpoints floating in violet haze. "Are we safe?" she murmured. "For tonight," Rourke said, pulling a chair to her bedside. He glanced at Doran. "Take watch at the canyon gate. If you see dust, shoot first." Doran nodded once and disappeared into the darkness. The house settled into silence, broken only by the crackle of firewood. Rourke remained seated, watching her breathe. He should have been angry. This woman had dragged a war straight to his doorstep. She'd put his land, his name, and his life in the sights of the most powerful marshal in the territory. But when his eyes drifted to the satchel on the dresser, the proof that Brack Moreland meant to steal Broken Rock, he understood something final. Their fates were already knotted together. Elira stirred, wincing. "Water." Rourke poured from the pitcher and held the cup to her lips, supporting her head. His calloused hand rested gently against her neck. She drank eagerly, some spilling down her chin. He wiped it away with his thumb. "You said Moreland is your stepfather," Rourke said quietly. "How long has he been planning this?" She closed her eyes, breathing through the pain. "Since my mother died." He waited. "He married her for her money," she continued. "She was a widow from Boston, came west for her health. She owned investments, land." Her voice hardened. "Then she died." "A riding accident," Elira whispered, bitterness cutting each word. Her horse spooked near the canyon edge. She swallowed. Moreland was the only one with her. He wept at the funeral. Everyone believed him. She turned her head toward Rourke, eyes clearer now. "I was 12. I saw him smiling when they lowered the coffin. A cold weight settled in Rourke's gut. He had known men like Moreland, men who believed the world existed to be taken. "He discovered I stole the ledger 3 days ago," Elira went on. "I was trying to reach Judge Ormond Vale in Tucson. He's the only federal judge Moreland hasn't bought. But his men cut me off. I had no choice but to take the stage to Dry Creek. Judge Vale sits in Prescott, Rourke said. That's 3 days' ride, she replied faintly. I know. I didn't make it. She reached for his hand again, fingers closing around his. It was becoming instinct now, a lifeline neither of them acknowledged. Why did you save me, Rourke? Elira Vance asked softly. You could have let the doctor patch me up, then walked away. Rourke Halden stared into the firelight crawling across the cabin walls. In the flicker of flame, memory rose uninvited. He saw Leora Halden. He saw the acres of stone and scrub he had broken his back to claim. Because that deed carries my name, he said at last. And because I don't tolerate men who shoot women. He'll come, Elira warned. He won't stop. Let him come, Rourke replied, his voice hardening into iron. This is Broken Rock. We bury our troubles here. Dawn arrived with a dangerous calm. The sky stretched clean and blue, innocent of the violence waiting beneath it. Rourke was on his feet before first light, circling the perimeter. He followed the fence line, testing the heavy timber gate guarding the canyon mouth. It was strong enough to stop stampeding cattle, but not strong enough to hold dynamite. By mid-morning, he was cleaning weapons. His collection could have armed a small militia, a legacy left by a father who'd fought in the border wars. A Sharps buffalo rifle for long shots, 2 Colt peacemakers, a double-barreled scattergun that kicked like a mule. When he returned inside, Elira was awake. She sat propped against the pillows, color creeping back into her cheeks. The deathly gray had softened into faint warmth. She wore one of Leora's old work shirts, something Doran Fitch had pulled from a trunk. The garment swallowed her slight frame, making her appear smaller, more breakable. You shouldn't be sitting up, Rourke said, entering with a tray of coffee and biscuits. I won't lie here waiting to die, she snapped. The fire had returned to her, sharper now. If they come, I want a gun. You can barely lift a spoon, Rourke replied, setting the tray down. He hesitated. Then he drew one of his Colts, unloaded it carefully, and handed it to her. She accepted it. Her hand trembled from weakness, but her grip was true. She checked the cylinder, snapped it shut, and aimed toward the hearth with practiced control. Rourke lifted a brow. Who taught you that? Brack Moreland, she said bitterly. He wanted the perfect daughter, one who could ride, shoot, and smile beside him at political dinners. Her eyes hardened. He never realized he was training his enemy. She returned the pistol. Loaded, leave it on the nightstand. Rourke did as she asked. The moment the iron touched wood, a shout rang out from outside. Rourke, Ryder! He was on his feet instantly, Sharp's rifle in hand. He reached the porch where Doran Fitch stood with a spyglass trained toward the canyon mouth. One rider, Doran said. My white flag. Rourke took the glass. Through the lens, he spotted a man on a bay horse moving slow up the trail. No badge, long dust coat, flat brim hat. That's not Moreland, Rourke muttered. No, Elira said. She had dragged herself to the doorway, leaning heavily against the frame. Leora's shirt hung loose on her shoulders. Her face was pale, but her eyes were locked forward. That's Varon Knox, she said quietly. Moreland's tracker. He's worse than the marshal. Moreland kills for profit, she went on. Knox kills because he enjoys it. Get back inside, Rourke ordered. He already knows I'm here, she replied. He's come to talk. Rourke stepped down toward the gate, Doran flanking him with a shotgun. The rider halted 20 yards out. Varon Knox was handsome in a snake-thin way, neatly trimmed mustache, eyes like dead coal. He smiled, teeth bright and perfect. "Mornin', Mr. Halden," Knox called pleasantly. His voice slid smooth as oil on water. "Fine stretch of land you've got here." "Defensible," Knox added. "Smart." "State your business and turn around," Rourke said, leveling the sharps at his chest. "Just carrying a message," Knox replied, resting his hands on the saddle horn, unconcerned by the rifle aimed at his heart. The marshal's worried about his stepdaughter. Poor thing took a knock to the head, got confused, walked off with some private papers. He wants her returned to Tucson. Proper doctor, proper care. "She's already seen a doctor," Rourke said evenly. "And the only thing wrong with her is the bullet your boss put inside her." Knox clicked his tongue. Nasty accusation. He smiled faintly. "You know, harboring a fugitive is a hanging offense. Interfering with a federal marshal earns a rope," Rourke Halden said evenly. "Trespassing on broken rock earns a bullet." He counted the odds without blinking. Baron Knox's smile never slipped, but his eyes thinned. "Here's the offer, Halden," Knox said. "Hand over the girl and the satchel. We ride out, quiet-like." He gestured with one gloved hand. "We'll even forget the deed to this land ever existed. Marshal Brackmoreland can be generous." "You keep your dirt," Knox continued. "The girl goes to a sanitarium, proper care, for her condition." Rourke barked a dry, humorless laugh. "You tell Moreland if he wants her," Rourke said, voice like iron scraping stone. "He can ride up here and take her himself. Tell him to bring a shovel. He's gonna need it." Knox studied him for a long moment. The charm drained from his face, leaving something cold and reptilian behind. "You're choosing wrong, Cowboy," Knox said quietly. "We've got 10 men in town. Another 10 riding up from Bisbee. We'll burn this canyon clean. You, the old soldier, and the girl." "Then stop talking," Rourke replied, thumbing back the hammer of his rifle, "and start burning." Knox tipped his hat. "See you at sundown." He turned his horse and rode off without looking back. Rourke watched him go, heart pounding heavy against his ribs. He turned to Dorr and Fitch. "Board the windows, everyone. Fill the troughs, soak the roof. They'll try to smoke us out." Rourke stepped back onto the porch where Elira Vance stood. Fear showed in her eyes, but she didn't retreat. "He offered you a bargain," she said quietly. "You could have traded me for your land." Rourke stopped in front of her. He reached up and brushed a loose strand of hair from her forehead. The softness of the gesture startled them both. "I don't trade lives," he said, "especially not with devils." "They've got 20 men," she whispered. "We've got 3, she added. "And the high ground." Rourke nodded. "And something else." "What?" "Nothing left to lose." The rest of the day blurred into preparation. The sun raced west, dragging night behind it. Rourke and Doran turned the ranch house into a fortress. Heavy oak tables were overturned and wedged against doors. Gun slits were carved into shutters. Ammunition was stacked in every room. As the sun sank behind the Dragoon Mountains, bleeding the sky orange and purple, the silence returned. But it wasn't peaceful. It was the hush of a predator waiting to strike. Rourke stood on the porch, watching shadows crawl along the canyon walls. He knew they were out there. He could feel them. "Rourke," Elira called from inside. He stepped back into the cabin. She sat at the kitchen table, the satchel open before her. One Colt Peacemaker rested beside her hand. "If they get inside," she said steadily, Don't let them take me alive. You promised. Rourke studied her. In the low firelight, she looked heartbreakingly beautiful. Damaged, defiant, unbroken. Something in his chest tightened. He moved closer, braced his hands on the table, and leaned down. They're not getting in, he said fiercely. And nobody dies tonight. Not you? Not me? Glass exploded. The front window shattered as a whiskey bottle stuffed with burning cloth sailed through the air and smashed against the stone hearth. Flames erupted instantly, splashing across the floor. Get down! Rourke roared, throwing himself over Elira as gunfire tore into the door. The siege of Broken Rock had begun. Orange firelight flooded the room as kerosene raced along the floorboards. Flames clawed up the table legs and licked at the curtains. The rug, Rourke shouted. He holstered his pistol, seized the heavy Navajo wool rug, and hurled it onto the fire. He stomped hard, crushing the flames beneath his boots. The wool smoldered, choking the blaze, filling the room with thick, black smoke that burned the eyes and throat. They're flanking left, Doran bellowed from the kitchen. His shotgun thundered in the confined space, followed by a man's scream outside. Got one, Doran shouted, but there's plenty more. Rourke crouched low and moved toward the shattered window. Through the shutter gap, he saw the yard lit by moonlight and erupting muzzle flashes. Bullets slammed into the log walls, punching through chinking and spraying dust and splinters into the air. It sounded like hail on tin, only deadlier. Elira, stay down, Rourke shouted over his shoulder. Elira Vance lay flat against the cold stone of the hearth. She wasn't hiding. The Colt Peacemaker rested across her knee. Her skin was pale, sweat streaking her temples, but her gaze stayed sharp and steady. She was guarding the front door. I'm not helpless, Rourke, she rasped through the smoke. I see a shadow on the porch. Rourke Halden spun just as the heavy oak latch shuddered. Someone slammed a boot against the door. Thud, thud, the wood groaned under the force. Fall back, Rourke whispered, working the lever on his Winchester. The door cracked. A boot punched through the panel. Then the dark mouth of a rifle followed. Elira didn't hesitate. She fired. The .45 thundered, recoil snapping her shoulder into the stone. The bullet tore through the door plank. A sharp grunt answered back. The rifle barrel vanished instantly. Good shot, Rourke muttered. He slid to the nearest firing slit and sent 3 fast rounds into the darkness, aiming for the muzzle flashes flickering near the barn. A curse echoed, then the heavy thud of a body hitting dirt. 2 down, Doran Fitch shouted. But they've got us pinned. Can't get a clear angle on the tree line. The fight settled into a merciless rhythm. For nearly an hour, the night filled with lead. The cabin was being eaten alive. Plates exploded in the cupboards. The hallway mirror burst into 1,000 glittering fragments. The attackers fought smart, rotating shooters, keeping heads down while others crept closer. Rourke crawled back to Elira. Blood seeped again through her bandages. The strain was tearing her apart. We can't hold forever, he said, shoving fresh rounds into numb fingers. They've got enough ammunition to turn this place into splinters. Sooner or later, one bullet finds us. What do we do? Elira asked. In the chaos, time seemed to stall. Her hand closed around his arm, gripping hard. Rourke, if they break in, you have to promise me something. I told you, no dying, he growled. No. She shook her head. The satchel. Burn it. If Moreland gets those deeds, he wins. He destroys everything. He doesn't win while I'm breathing, Rourke said fiercely. Then, silence. The gunfire stopped. The quiet that followed felt heavier than the shooting ever had. Rourke's ears rang with a sharp, whining pitch. Smoke drifted lazily through moonbeams, slicing in through bullet holes. Why'd they stop? Doran whispered, edging into the room. His face was blackened with soot, blood tracing a cut along his cheek. Reloading? He asked. No, Rourke said, dread tightening his gut. They're thinking. From the darkness beyond the yard, a voice carried forward. It wasn't Varen Knox's smooth drawl. This one was deeper, commanding. Rourke Halden, the voice boomed. You fight like a demon, son. I'll grant you that. Elira went rigid. Her fingers dug into Rourke's arm. That's him, she whispered. That's Brack Moreland. Rourke edged toward the shattered window, keeping to the side. Marshal Moreland, he called back. You're well outside your jurisdiction, and you're trespassing on private land. The law goes where I go, Moreland shouted. And right now, the law says you're harboring a fugitive and resisting arrest. But I'm a reasonable man, Moreland continued. I don't want to kill a good rancher over a family matter. Shooting a woman on a stagecoach isn't a family matter, Rourke shouted. That's attempted murder. She's confused, Moreland replied, his tone turning falsely gentle. She's ill, Rourke. She stole documents vital to the future of Arizona Territory. I have 20 men here, he went on, and I have dynamite. You've got 5 minutes to send her out, with the satchel. If you don't, I'll blow the foundation clean out from under your house. Rourke looked at Doran. The old sergeant gave a grim nod. He ain't bluffing, boss. I can smell the fuse. Rourke, Elira whispered. He won't let you live even if you hand me over. He can't leave witnesses. I know, Rourke said quietly. He glanced around the shattered room. They were boxed in. The front was covered, and time was bleeding away. The back way's covered, Rourke Halden said under his breath. Is there a cellar? Elira Vance asked. A root cellar, Rourke replied. But it doesn't go anywhere, just a pit. Then his gaze lifted to the fireplace. It was enormous, stacked from riverstone and pressed hard against the cliff wall the cabin was built into. The mine shaft, Rourke murmured. What? Doran Fitch asked. My father didn't place this house against the rock by accident, Rourke said, thoughts racing. He built it over the mouth of an old silver prospect. He sealed it up because it was dry, but the tunnel's still there, behind the pantry wall. It was reckless, near madness. The shaft hadn't been used in 30 years. It could have collapsed. It could be crawling with rattlers. But it led out the backside of the spur, opening halfway up the canyon wall behind Moreland's men. Move the pantry shelves, Rourke ordered. Doran grunted and shoved the heavy boards aside. Sacks of flour and jars of pickled peaches slid to the floor with dull thumps, exposing rough-hewn timbers behind them. Rourke turned to Elira. Can you walk? I can crawl if I have to, she said through clenched teeth. Outside, Brack Moreland's voice thundered. 1 minute. Doran seized a crowbar and jammed it between the boards. Rusted nails screamed as the planks tore free, opening into a black hollow that breathed out cold, stale air. It's open, Doran said. Go, Rourke ordered, lifting Elira to her feet. Pain cut through her, but she stayed upright. He pressed the satchel into her hands. Take the lantern. Keep it low. Don't stop until you see moonlight. You're coming with me, she said, panic flaring. I can't, Rourke replied. If I leave now, they'll know we're gone before you reach the exit. I have to keep them talking." Before she could answer, he cupped her face and kissed her. It was rough and desperate. Smoke, blood, and fear all tangled together. "Go," he whispered. "Don't wait." Doran helped her into the tunnel. "I'll cover her back, boss," he said. "Don't take too long." Rourke watched them vanish into the mountain's throat. He shoved the pantry shelves back into place, thin cover, but enough for seconds. Then he walked calmly back toward the front window. "Time's up, Halden," Moreland roared. "Light it." "Wait," Rourke shouted. He kicked the door open and stepped onto the porch, hands raised high. The sudden movement froze the yard. 20 rifles swung toward his chest. Rourke stood bathed in moonlight, an easy target. "Don't fire," Moreland commanded. A figure stepped from the shadows near the trough. Brack Moreland was a massive man, wrapped in a spotless gray suit. His white hat gleamed beneath the moon. He approached slowly, boots crunching gravel. Varun Knox walked beside him, a stick of dynamite clutched casually in his hand. "Smart choice," Moreland said, stopping at the foot of the steps. "Where is she?" "Inside." Rourke lied evenly. "She's bled too much. I'm not dying over a corpse." Moreland smiled, cold and empty. "Practical. I respect that." "Bring out the satchel," he continued. "Then we'll discuss the terms of your surrender." "I want to know why," Rourke said, stalling. "Why is a U.S. marshal burning ranches for a few acres of scrub?" Moreland chuckled. He pulled a cigar from his pocket and lit it, the flame carving his face in sharp orange lines. "Scrub?" he said. "Is that what you think this is?" He stepped closer. "It isn't about grass, son. It's about copper." Rourke frowned. "Senator Clark, the United Verde Interests." Moreland nodded. "There's a vein running through these mountains that makes Bisbee look like a sandbox. But to haul the ore, they need rails, and the only flat grade through the range runs straight through your living room." Anger boiled in Rourke's gut. "You're killing people for a railroad." "Progress," Moreland corrected. "The Arizona-New Mexico line is coming." "You could have been rich, Halden." He sighed. "Now you're just in the way." Moreland flicked his chin toward Knox. "Go inside," he said. "Get the satchel. Put a bullet in the girl's head. Make it look like she died in the fight." Knox grinned and stepped onto the porch, brushing past Rourke, shoving him aside. Rourke waited until Knox reached the doorway. Then he moved. Rourke didn't reach for his revolver. He went for the blade hidden inside his boot. In one smooth motion, he drove it upward into Varun Knox's thigh. Knox howled in pain, dropping the stick of dynamite. The fuse wasn't lit, but the moment of chaos was enough. Rourke seized Knox by the collar and hurled him backward off the porch. The tracker slammed hard into Brack Moreland, both men crashing together in a knot of limbs. "Run!" Rourke roared. He dove sideways into the horse trough as rifle fire exploded behind him. Bullets shredded the porch boards where he'd stood seconds earlier. Splinters burst into the air like wooden shrapnel. Rourke rolled from the trough and stayed low, sprinting toward the barn. "Kill him!" Moreland screamed, clawing free of the pile. Rourke didn't stop at the barn. He grabbed the drainage pipe, hauled himself upward, and rolled onto the low roof. From there, he leapt toward the rocky face of the cliff. Shale slid beneath his boots. Shots cracked around him, lead snapping against stone. He climbed hard, lungs burning. He had to reach the upper mouth of the mine shaft, the exit Elira and Doran were using. Rourke reached the ledge and looked down. Moreland's men were swarming the house. The front door burst inward. Moments later, a shout drifted up through the canyon. "She's gone! The house is empty! Find them!" Moreland's voice echoed between the walls of stone. "They're in the rocks." Rourke slipped into the narrow cleft of the upper tunnel. Inside, 10 feet back in the darkness, he found Doran Fitch and Elira Vance crouched together. "You made it," Elira whispered, relief flooding her face. "They know we're not in the house," Rourke panted. "We have to keep moving. This tunnel climbs to the high ridge. If we reach the horses in the upper pasture, we can make Prescott." "Prescott?" Doran murmured. "That's 3 days through bad country." "It's the only place Moreland can't touch us," Rourke said. "Judge Ormond Vale sits court there on Tuesday. If this satchel reaches him, Moreland hangs." "Then we ride," Elira said. She pushed herself upright, pain forgotten, replaced by cold, focused fury. "I want to see his face when the gavel falls." They pressed deeper into the mountain, leaving broken rock behind. Then Rourke froze. He lifted one hand. "What?" Doran whispered. "Listen." From ahead, where the tunnel climbed toward moonlight, came the unmistakable sound of boots scraping stone. Rourke raised the lantern. A man stood in the passage, blocking their way, shotgun leveled. It wasn't one of Moreland's riders. It was Merrick Shaw, the storekeeper from Dry Creek. Elira gasped. "Merrick." Merrick's face glistened with sweat in the lantern glow. "I'm sorry, Rourke," he said shakily. "Moreland's got my wife. He said if I didn't watch the back exit, he'd kill her." The betrayal cut deeper than lead. Rourke stared at the man he'd known for 10 years. "Put the gun down, Merrick," he said quietly. "I can't," Merrick sobbed, lifting the barrels. "He's watching. He's right behind me." A shape moved in the darkness beyond him. Another man stepped forward, not Moreland. A native scout, one of the marshal's trackers. "Drop your weapons," the scout commanded. Rourke glanced at Elira. They were trapped. Moreland's men below, betrayal above. "I'm sorry," Rourke whispered. "Don't be," Elira replied, her hand brushing his pistol grip. "We're not finished yet." The tunnel felt smaller by the second, air thick with damp stone and treachery. Merrick's hands shook so badly the shotgun barrels quivered. Behind him, the Apache scout stood motionless, finger tightening on his trigger. "Merrick," Rourke said softly, without anger, "you know Moreland. Once he gets what he wants, do you think he'll leave you or your wife alive? Witnesses are loose ends." "I have to," Merrick cried. "No," Elira said, stepping forward. She slid the satchel behind her back. "You still have a choice," she told him. "Be a murderer or be a man." The hesitation was enough. As Merrick faltered, the scout lost patience. He shoved him aside and raised his rifle toward Rourke. In that heartbeat of chaos, Doran Fitch moved. He didn't fire. A shot in the tunnel would have deafened them all. Instead, he swung the heavy iron crowbar, still clutched in his hand. It struck the support beam beside the scout's head. The ancient timber split with a thunderous crack, like a cannon firing underground. "Run!" Doran Fitch roared. The tunnel groaned like a dying beast. Stone cracked overhead as the ceiling began to give way. A violent rain of rock thundered down between them and the scout. Rourke Halden seized Elira Vance's hand and dragged her forward. They scrambled over the rising mound of debris, shoving past a stunned Merrick Shaw just as the passage behind them collapsed in a choking cloud of dust. The mountain swallowed the scout whole. They burst from the upper shaft into the cold night air of the high ridge. Below them, Broken rock burned, flames clawing at the sky, turning the canyon into a furnace of orange and black. But they were alive. The ride toward Prescott blurred into exhaustion and terror. They mounted the horses Rourke kept in the upper pasture and drove them hard, pushing the animals to the brink. For 3 days they avoided the main trails, slipping through arroyos and dry washes, dodging Moreland's patrols. They slept in turns beneath wide, indifferent stars. On the 4th morning, they rode down Gurley Street in Prescott. They looked like ghosts, faces hollow, clothes torn, dust and dried blood clinging to them. People stopped and stared as they dismounted before the Yavapai County Courthouse. Inside, the courtroom was already crowded. Judge Orman Vale, known for his thick white handlebar mustache and iron gavel, presided over a land dispute. The double doors slammed open. Rourke strode down the center aisle, boots echoing. Elira limped beside him, the leather satchel clenched in her hand. "Order," Judge Vale thundered. "What is the meaning of this interruption?" "Justice, Your Honor," Rourke declared, his voice raw but carrying through the chamber. From the front bench, a man rose. It was Brack Moreland. He had arrived by rail hours earlier, clean, composed, confident. "Arrest them," Moreland shouted, flashing his badge. "They are fugitives wanted for the murder of a federal agent." "He's lying," Elira said. Her voice cut through the room, clear, unshaking. She stepped forward and slammed the satchel onto the bench. "Inside this bag are 84 fraudulent land deeds signed by Marshal Brack Moreland," she said, "along with contracts binding stolen territory to the United Verde Copper Company for a private railway." The courtroom fell dead silent. Color drained from Moreland's face. He reached toward his gun. "Don't," Rourke warned quietly, his hand hovering near his Colt. "Give me a reason." Judge Vale opened the satchel. He removed the ledger, adjusted his spectacles, and read. A long minute passed, then another. Finally, he looked up, his eyes hard as flint. "Bailiff," the judge said evenly, "take the marshal into custody." Moreland lunged, but Rourke was faster. He tackled him across the aisle, driving him into the jury box. Moreland fought like a cornered animal, but Rourke's fury had been building for 3 long years. He pinned Moreland to the floor, forearm tight against his throat. "It's over," Rourke growled. 2 weeks later, the smoke had cleared. Rourke stood on the porch of Broken Rock. The house was scorched, blackened by fire, but the stone foundation still stood. The land was still his. Elira stepped out beside him, wearing a simple blue dress she'd bought in town. She joined him as the sun dipped behind the Dragoon Mountains, painting the cliffs in gold and violet. "The governor's opened an inquiry," she said. "Moreland will hang for what he did." "And you?" Rourke asked softly. "You've reclaimed your mother's estate. You're a wealthy woman now." "Boston's a long way from here." Elira looked across the harsh land, then at Rourke's weathered face. She reached for his hand, threading her fingers through his. "I never liked Boston," she said with a small smile. "The air's better here. And I hear this ranch needs a new manager." Rourke squeezed her hand. For the first time in years, the road ahead didn't feel lonely. "I reckon it does," he said. "Welcome home, Elira." And that, folks, is the legend of the woman in red and the rancher of Broken Rock. History books may never speak Rourke Halden's name, but the court records of Prescott in 1889 still preserve the trial that shattered a corrupt railway empire. Finally, let me send my deep thanks to you. Thank you for listening. If this story has touched your heart, I invite you to stay with us to discover more true tales of the Wild West. Stories that honor resilience, tenderness, and the spirit that God placed in those who blaze the trail. Subscribe, share, leave your thoughts in the comments, and join us once again to journey across this untamed land. Thank you. Aviso legal/disclaimer. These stories are crafted purely for entertainment and may contain imaginative additions or dramatic interpretations inspired by old frontier eras. We use AI-based resources, voice, imagery, and drafting, as part of our creative process. But every final detail is carefully reviewed and shaped by human effort to preserve emotional depth and authenticity. We strictly follow YouTube's rules regarding AI-generated content and refrain from deepfakes, altered identities, or misleading representations. All images, sounds, and related materials are lawfully obtained. Please do not reuse, modify, or distribute any portion of this content without written permission. Thank you for valuing creativity, respect, and original work.